First of all, giving honor to the divine mind of the universe. It's known by many names that transcends all names. We honor our ancestors, particularly the special ancestor who's the founder of this house, Bishop Dr. Barbara Lewis King. We give honor and thanks to the presiding bishop of this house, Bishop Jack Bomar. And we give honor to our Hillside family, with whom we are delighted to be in contact with today. My subject today is one that is very interesting in the sense that I want to suggest to you that I have good news. The good news is that we are free. Good news, we are free. And that's the topic for today. When I say that we are free, I don't mean Juneteenth kind of free. I don't mean off the plantation kind of free. I don't mean sit at the lunch counter kind of free. I don't mean not right to vote kind of free. I don't mean not out of jail kind of free. I don't mean not divorced from a bad relationship kind of free. I don't mean not quit and retired from a job with a boss from hell kind of free. It doesn't mean any of those kinds of things that you're trying to escape from. The freedom that I'm talking about is freedom not from anything or from anybody, but it's that kind of freedom that is free to be. Free to be. And I want to suggest to you that we are all free. And we want you to know that even if you didn't get the memo, you're free. We want you to understand that we get our freedom when we become aware and become truly accepting of the reality that we are spiritual beings who are in fact having a human experience. Our freedom is built into the very nature of who we are. The Christian mystic Howard Thurman often quoted the idea, accepted in many faith traditions, that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are actually spiritual beings having a human experience. In Psalms 82:6, David says, "Ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High." In 1 Corinthians 3 and 16, we find Paul saying that, "Do you not know that you are a temple of God and the Spirit of God dwells in you?" We enter this earth environment magnificently equipped with this incredible, magnificent computer hard drive that's called a human brain and sensory system. The system has endless capacity to download additional applications or apps, if you will. This body, this earth-based body that we have, is incredibly well equipped to process information that is connected with the earth in which we find ourselves. Our spiritual selves are placed into this mechanism that's called a body, and therefore it's able to operate in this earth environment. The interesting thing is, though, is that the body remains connected to the earth from which it came. And it serves then as a kind of gravity, or it's a vessel for our spiritual bodies, but it's also a form of gravity that connects us to the earth itself. And so for the period of time, for the time that we are traveling in this earth dimension, we are connected to the earth by way of this body that we've been given. We leave it, and this body goes back to the earth, and we ascend into the continuation of our spiritual experience. John 3:6 says, he describes this whole idea by saying, that which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that is born of the Spirit is spirit. Actually, the differentiation of our spirit identity from our flesh identity becomes the challenge of obtaining this freedom that I'm talking about. The way that we differentiate and distinguish ourselves as spirits from this body that we are is the challenge of our learning experience here in this earth dimension. The majority of our human problems are a result of the difficulty to rise above the pull of gravity from this earth vessel that we find ourselves in. But let's be very clear. Contrary to many of the erroneous ideas that we learn from both our environments, particularly from our religious teachings, we are taught that the body is somehow, the flesh is evil or sinful. That's not true. The body is, the flesh is what it is. It is in fact a part of the perfect order of earth energy. It is what it is. It can be great fun, but it can also cause great pain. But the body ain't you. The body is where you find yourself dwelling, but it's not you. And in much the same way that you don't blame gravity when you happen to fall, happen to stumble or fall, and you don't somehow talk about, therefore, gravity is evil. Gravity is something that the devil is in gravity because you fell, because you stumbled. In the same way, we can't think of the body, the flesh, as being evil, because if we fall, we're simply responding to what the body does naturally, and that is maintains its connection, operating within the sphere of the earthly demands. Now, we can claim our freedom when we perform our duties as caretakers of this temple and use the transformational formula of the ancient keepers of the temples, that we recognize our responsibility, that we are temple caretakers. We find in Corinthians 3rd, 16th, Paul once again suggests that, don't you know that you are the temple of God? That's a part of who we are, that somehow to be temple caretakers in many ways. However, if we don't in fact recognize our responsibility, our divine responsibility as a caretaker of the temple, we end up letting the temple go into ruin and letting the temple then begin to take control of our divine responsibility as free spiritual agents that happen to be dwelling in the temple. What does that mean? We have like three kind of examples of how this fleshly reality can somehow infringe upon our natural spiritual identity. One of them is materialism. Now, materials are necessary in terms of working in the earth dimension, because we need materials to build. We need materials to build, and therefore materials are very crucial in terms of our interaction with the earth environment. Now, if we permit the materials to somehow become fallen and to stumble into materialism, then we lose sight of our identity as spiritual creatures. We begin to lose our freedom and become in bondage to materialism, which is different from the use of materials. But as spiritual creatures, we use the materials in ways that avoid the downfalling form of things such as greed and gluttony and selfishness. These are situations where we have simply confused the identity of who we are. So fallen materialism becomes greed, gluttony, selfishness. There's a fallen materialism because we begin to define ourselves as stuff. We become trapped by the mercurial nature of stuff, going up and down depending on where the stuff goes. And we lose sight of our ability to transcend, which is what our spiritual identity is all about. But what we can do in terms of mastering this vulnerability is be like the alchemists and transmute materialism with our spiritual powers of imagination and strength, and follow the instructions of your divine creation, which when we were instructed in the garden to be fruitful and dominate over the garden. Now, what does that mean? Dominate does not mean to somehow overpower or to subjugate anything. It means to learn from the characteristics of those things in the garden. So the process then of using those spiritual powers of imagination, we're able to learn to fly like the birds, even though we weren't born to fly. We are able to somehow swim like the whale, when we were not born to be able to swim in that nature. We will somehow be able to build towering palaces like the mountains and use the herbs and the food for plants for healing and nourishment. We're able to make music, art, and dance. We're able to seek beauty. All of these things are a result of using materials in a constructive way, fueled by imagination, fueled by strength, fueled by our spiritual selves, rather than being subjected to the fallen gravity of the materialism and the fall and the stumbling nature of what materialism will do. The reality, again, is that materialism in and of itself is not something that is inborn evil. It's simply the nature of the connection to the earth. So you either define yourself as flesh, or you define yourself as spirit. You either define yourself with the characteristics of the earth, or you become something that rises above that. These are the issues that becomes created by operating in an environment that begins to create the conditions of materialism. Another quality that comes out, another example of what can happen when you have a fallen nature, a fallen flesh, if you will, is racism itself. Racism, first of all, there's no such thing as race. Race does not exist. With or without melanin, race is not a reality. It is something that represents a fallen quality of flesh, and therefore a distortion of what is in fact a higher kind of quality. What we need to do is to preserve the reality of the higher quality. So we should transmute it with spirit. And the differences that we see among different people, among different tribes, if you will, it becomes consistent with the African quality of what we call Ubuntu. Ubuntu means I am because we are, which is the same principle as namaste. I can see myself in you, and I see the divinity of you in me, in you. The Holy Quran says that I made you of tribes and nations so that you would know each other and not despise each other. So the differences that you find among humanity are not there in their natural form to serve as a means by which we can distinguish and despise and dislike each other, but it becomes a mechanism by which we can expand our ability to love each other and to love ourselves in the whole process of growing. But that's when we are able to raise the quality, raise the obvious difference into the higher reality of what it means to be able to somehow understand difference as sameness. That's a spiritual quality. And therefore, that begins to take us into the freedom rather than the incarceration and bondage of something such as racism, which is the same as the fallen quality of materialism. Then there is the third example I want to suggest, and that is sexism. Sexism has all the problems that come from defining oneself as a sexual creature by gender or behavior. When we define ourselves as the flesh of sex, we got problems. And all the problems we have that result from us trying to understand who we are as sexual creatures. Even though we have all kind of justifications for the benefits of it, it's in fact the source of our greatest problem. But we should transmute that. We transmute that with the same spirit of love, and it becomes a force to procreate. Now, the procreation is only metaphorically demonstrated by the reproductive quality. So we find in a reproduction a metaphorical picture of what procreation is, because it is with love that we're able to come together and expand the connectedness between ourselves. We are able to build family. We procreate family. And family begins to grow as a result of our ability to come together in love. But love is cannot be left as simply a physical or flesh quality. It must be understood as something that transcends flesh in a higher way. So as we begin to build community, as we begin to build family, we are then able to use this principle of sexuality or sex as a principle of using the flesh quality as something that is able to permit us to have spiritual development. The idea is that if we begin to grow ourselves based on our spiritual identity as creatures of spirit, then we are able to gain mastery over the limitations that come about when we define ourselves as flesh. Again, flesh ain't evil. Flesh is simply flesh. Flesh is not evil. Flesh is what it does as a form of magnetic attraction and attachment to the earth itself. Therefore, I want to suggest to you that we are created to be free. We are created to be free as spiritual creatures. We are created to be free as spiritual creatures that carry the brand of the Creator in our fundamental makeup. If we claim our proper identity, then we will in fact be free at last. Free at last. Thank God Almighty, we'll really be free at last. Namaskar.